Good morning. Today we're going to talk about secondary sources on Lexis and Westlaw. Secondary sources are a good place to start any legal research project because they allow you to learn a little bit about the topic before you start searching cases and statutes and other things. They also help you to learn the language that's discussed, the legal terminology that you might want to put in your list of keywords for later searching. And also, secondary sources will identify the leading cases and the key statutes and regulations that govern a particular topic area. As you get into your research, you might want to return back to secondary sources to find out strategies for litigating or arguing a particular thing, to see, and this is where law reviews have a strength, where legislation and jurisprudential thinking is going along with the topic. And even some treatises will be set up to help you try a case or make an argument in court. So today, I'm going to start out on Lexis and show you how to look at law reviews, and then I'm going to briefly talk about treatises. Again, law reviews are a good place to start and just get some of the language and some of the idea of where things are going. So I'm going to click on Law Reviews from the Explore Content area. And I'm going to run a simple search using plain language, or what me and Professor Gao call algorithmic searching. And there will be more about that in this class. You might have encountered it in the readings. So I'm just going to run a search of vaccine regulation. And there's a number of articles. There's a chunk of information here, and it's a good thing to go through and read these and see if any of them have anything that is useful for what you're thinking about searching for your particular problem. Excuse me. So as you go along and read through these, you might even want to click on one of these and pull it up and assess it. Research is often reading the documents you find, jotting down a few things, writing down their site in case you want to come back and then go back to it. The chunks here come from the words, the place where most words are together, but you can see the word vaccine shows up a lot more than regulation in there. But you find out there's a National Vaccine Injury Act later. I think there's something about another vaccine act and other articles and World Health Organization reports. On the side, Westlaw and Lexis use the left bar to filter your research, and you've used that probably in cases. There's some things that you might want to think about for secondary sources when you're here. Sometimes you might want to look at category. Here's law review and reviews. You're already there, but I'll show you in treatises that might be useful. Jurisdiction is more of a case. I like the timeline tool, particularly in Lexis, because I don't have to type things in here. I can just take a slice and say, it may have been interesting to look at, some of the problems with vaccines and vaccine litigation long ago, but I'm going to look at the last 5 years. And you just would click on OK to apply that. Another thing, when you're not really sure about what you're looking at, is keyword, and I mean the topic. You're not really sure kind of what parts it has. You might want to look at practice area and topics and limited. I mean, if you're talking about um, issues that have to do with administrative law, like food and drug regulation, you don't need things about criminal cases coming out of bad vaccines and adulteration of those. That will be useful. The other thing I find useful in this area is the keyword. Now, these are structured keywords that Lexis editors have decided are important. So you may look through and see if any of them are useful for what you're looking at, and maybe apply those. So I'm thinking maybe, something to do with customers, or to get at product liability might be useful for this. I'm not going to apply any of those. So there's a lot of things you can do, and of course they're up here, and you can use them there. The other thing you could do is, we're going to talk about the difference between algorithmic and terms and connectors or Boolean searching later. But just to let you know, this weird little 3 dots, which stands for pretty much nothing more than, I think it's an inverted ellipsis, so it suggests there's more here. And one of the things it has is run search as terms and connectors. When you click that, you now have a terms and connectors search. Now, it's probably not the best, so you can go here and maybe make it better. Let's see, I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that in parentheses, and you're going to hear all about the stuff I do with that. And let me see. Try to remember, I think it's title and vaccine and regulation. I'm going to try that. And then that kind of looks for things that find themselves somewhere in the titles or subpart titles. So the title search is kind of useful in secondary sources, because titles don't usually hide the ball in those titles. There may be a cutesy title before the colon, but after the colon, they try to put all of the keywords in there. All right, so that's kind of the things you can do. I'm assuming you know everything else. One thing I'll always point you out when I'm in places, you don't have to listen to the way they sort things. You can sort these. I'm not sure why document title's that useful, but there may be some places. But my one thing is that you may want to date them from newest. If you're comfortable with your search's relevance on its own face, then searching by newest to oldest gets you the newest materials. So some of these early ones are from what I would call the COVID era, and may be relevant to people thinking about vaccines in our days. If you were taking my legal history class, you might want to do oldest to newest, and look at within our parameters. Remember, I didn't keep all of the things. I've already have a date restriction here, and look at things as they go. Not only legal history is this useful, but legislative history. So say you're doing some legislative history, and we'll talk about that later in the class, and you're like, I'm not really sure I'm understanding all this. Well, while that legislation was going through, people were writing about it in secondary sources. So sometimes you limit to right around the time of passing a piece of legislation, run some secondary sources, and then do an oldest to newest within that time frame, and you get kind of a running tally of what's going on at that time. All right, I'm going to do another search of treatises. Now, there's a couple of different ways I can do it here, but I'm lazy, and I hit the Lexis plus button again and just go back and start over again because there's a lot of backward clicks and things you can do. I'm now going to look at treatises. Okay, under treatises, you will see that they're broken down by various state and practice area. You can run an overall search, and you can use a couple of important databases, American Law Reports and American Jurisprudence. American Jurisprudence is a legal encyclopedia that has all of its topics in alphabetical order like a traditional encyclopedia. American Law Reports has articles that are a little bit narrower than an encyclopedia article like copyright or taxation. But nonetheless, once you get an article, they read like an encyclopedia. They're very fact-based and just lay out a lot of cases and things. So they're important to look at, and they're definitely a major part of any secondary source search. I'm just going to jump in and search Food and Drug Act. From reading those other things, I have learned that the Food and Drug Act is used for vaccines. I'm not really sure how, so I want to learn more about it. And I'll just hit and click. Okay. Now I'm finding American Law Reports articles coming up. And you can see how it is. Construction and application of food additives, provisions of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It's got a cite to that act, and it starts talking about things having to do with construction and application of this. Now, you may think I'm interested in vaccines. You might find reading through this that you learn a lot about the procedures that take place in the Food and Drug and apparently Cosmetic Act, as it is now constituted, that will be helpful. But so you might want to jot this article down because of that. And then, look at some of these other things, defining a drug. Is a vaccine a drug? You can also use your little button up here your little pencil to add vaccines and see what happens there. And you may get more information there. All right. By the way, I'm not saying for the purpose of this class that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act actually applies to vaccines. As I'm researching, I'm jumping to conclusions and proving them, and not just through my searches. By reading a little bit, and here I see vaccines, I may start looking at that more carefully, and those kind of things there. You also have your searches over here to do. A couple I find useful. Of course, the keyword here is useful. Got manufacturer here. I would definitely find that useful if you're representing a manufacturer. Another important one is publisher. And the reason it's important is you may, after a while, learn something, either that your law firm has some books or that your partners really like some books from a particular publisher. One of the more prominent publishers is Matthew Bender and Company. Also, another collection that you may want to look at is just LexisNexis books. Those books are more general, and if you find a really good one, you might go to your boss and say, hey, this book right here is so good, we might just buy a copy of it. And here you start finding more information. So, to sum up for Lexis searching of secondary sources, look at the bar, look at publisher keyword for treatises. It doesn't have it over here, but law reviews have a date area. Don't forget your area up here where you can change from algorithmic to Boolean searching. And always you can refer up here. Of course, you can remove any of these things by clicking that.